But like, you work with older people, hit the money in the business. That's how I got started.
Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today?
Good morning.
Good morning. Hey, it's supposed to be another beautiful day. Yes, who was able to get outside and enjoy yesterday? Okay, you know, we got a little taste of Florida yesterday. The only reason why I say Florida, I was down in Florida last week, and so I got kind of another taste of it yesterday. It looks like maybe today too, except for it's, you know, maybe a little rainy and won't be as great to be outside. But thank you so much for joining us today. We've got a great speaker. Love this couple, Sherry and Bryan, and just so excited to hear what Bryan's got to share today. But before we get started, I'd like to ask Jeff Elder to come up and open us up in prayer today.
Good morning, everybody. So glad to see you. Let's kind of commit this time to the Lord and ask Him to bless and guide and give Bryan wisdom as he speaks and give us hearts to hear whatever he has to say to us this morning. Let's pray. Father, we just love you so much, Lord, and I'm just reminded each day about that verse that says that your mercies are new every morning. And Lord, this is a new morning, this is a new day, which means that there are new mercies that you have for us. And so, Lord, help us to embrace those, help us to step into those. Lord, I commit this time into your hands. I pray for Bryan that you would just speak through him, give him wisdom, and Lord, give us hearts to hear not just Bryan's voice, but really, at the end of the day, it's your voice that we want to hear. And so, Lord, speak to us this morning. Thank you that you will. And we just commit this time in your name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. We also want, hey, good morning. We also want to thank our sponsor today for our food. Okay, I hope everybody's got a nice plate out here, because there's some good food out there. But Sherry Miller, with her FPC medallion consulting, is here, and she's providing our food supply. Bryan, I've had the privilege to spend some time with Bryan, and you know, we'd love to do one-on-ones with people. So I know, you know, most people that are in here have been here before, but just to share a little bit. Not only do we have events like this with Noble, where we have some live on-site events, we also have virtual ones, okay? We have virtual folks that are online with us at our live on-site events too, so we welcome them as well. But we also have one-on-ones where we spend a good amount of time, usually on average about 2 hours at least, with somebody on a one-on-one basis, and just kind of dive in a little bit to what they're doing and how we might be able to help them, you know, and what we find out often is what they come in and thinking that they need help with oftentimes isn't exactly what they need help with, right? Sometimes we have to have other people to come in and listen, okay, and then share, hey, this is kind of the direction we think that you best can start off with or grow. And that's not uncommon, right? We always have to kind of do some self-checking and ask others to kind of step in and help us with that. And so, you know, a lot of times we get to know people just here, okay? We don't really get to know people, you know, and those one-on-ones I love, and so valuable because you really then get to know people more in depth and make friendships, okay? And one of the great things that we realized here as well is that, you know, we have more people that like to come to Noble events, but we don't have much social that's attached to it, okay? And we're gonna start doing that. So actually we're gonna start having some more regular social events where people not only come to just an event, right? And can interact, a little bit of networking, but also have some social, where there's some times maybe we can go do some axe throwing or some, you know, or some top golf or whatever, and have a little bit of fun, but also get to know each other a little deeper and have those relationships start to build and be a little stickier. So you're going to see some more about that. But I've had a chance to spend time with Bryan one-on-one as well as over dinner and some other times, and just really appreciate his heart, okay, for the people that he works with, and the service that he wants to provide. And you know what? That's what we're looking for, right? It's all the heart, okay? It's all the heart. And so it's a privilege today. I haven't heard Bryan present yet, so this will be a first for me as well, but excited for him to be here and what he has to share. So Bryan, thank you so much for being you and person for the kingdom, and appreciate what you're going to share with us today. So let's get Bryan.
All right, thank you for that awesome introduction. I think that there are multiple firsts for me. So I presented on this topic quite a bit actually, and was many years ago when emotional intelligence started becoming more prevalent in organizations. I was on the kind of the front edge of bringing that into organizations, but I haven't spoken in front of Chaz, not my wife, other than practicing in the office, and then I have family on today as well. So it'll be my first time talking to them. The other first will be bringing in the biblical perspective in a more overt way, right? So I obviously use the guidance from the Bible, but I don't really talk about that so much. So I appreciate your prayer, Jeff, because I do hope God speaks through that instead of just me, because he'll do a much better job. But I have incorporated, right, the scripture and some of the thinking behind how this emotional intelligence and many of the things we do in our larger organizations really are biblically based, right? We don't necessarily overtly talk about it in certain situations, but they are biblically based. So with that, we're going to jump right in, and it starts off with relationships, and of course, we're going to use emotional intelligence to create stronger relationships. So I'll go down through and first start us off with understanding why I think relationships are probably one of the most important, if not the most important thing you can focus on, not only in life, but certainly in your businesses as well. So I'll try to make that tie for the entrepreneurs here of how we can use this to make our businesses better. So one thing I love about the Bible is you can go and find scripture that's very short, right? And yet it replaces a whole laundry list of classroom norms. If you ever sat in a traditional classroom or workshop, right, there's all kinds of classroom norms, respect the individual, right, participate fully, all those things. If we just get our heart right, as Chaz said earlier, if we get our heart right, everything kind of falls into place. And so this is scripture, helps us do that. It's one of my favorites because of the work I do, obviously, but as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. If we focus on that today and helping each other to be better, helping each other to grow and learn and improve our businesses, all that other stuff just kind of takes care of itself. So that's why I say this is our learning environment guidance from the Bible. Now, whenever we're working, and there's multiple tools, emotional intelligence is probably one of the better things to think about when we think about strengthening our relationships. But whenever we're trying to do that, whether it's DISC or Myers-Briggs or any other kind of tool where you're trying to understand human behavior, there's really three things you need to do to make it effective. You first use the knowledge that you're gaining to understand more about yourself. So how do I operate? How do I think? What are my preferences? And then you can also learn more about the other person, wherever that may be. It might be a group of people, right? And so you're going to try to learn more about them. And of course, you're going to take action and adapt behavior based off of that, right? So that then you have a stronger relationship. It's not that you're changing who you are. You're not being fake. You're just adjusting so that you can connect more and give people what they need in your interactions with them. Yes?
Is that quote you?
That's me, yeah.
On the bottom there.
Yes, that's me too.
Okay, because I want to use it, so I'm going to attribute it to you, but I like that. Thank you.
Yes, yes, and that leads me to my next thing. You see, they have a handout. Here's a workbook. I'm going to ask you to do stuff because I really, really believe this. Knowing is good. Doing pays the bills. Right? It's good to know stuff, but if you're gonna, you have to apply it to make it work and make it useful. And so I encourage you when you first start learning a new topic. There might be people who have a lot of experience with emotional intelligence. Probably some that don't. But whenever you work with a new concept, it takes some time, right, to get used to it and use it. So I will encourage you to struggle with it and come back to it because it is, and I'll lay out the case for why there be a good ROI on spending the time to learn some of these things and to improve in these areas. All right, so today's objectives, you always have to have objectives. Can't have a class without objectives. So understand the importance of strong relationships. That'll be the kind of the first section that we talk about. And then I will plan on, this is the new part, right? Weaving the insights from contemporary psychology with biblical principles, right? And that tie will help us understand it more fully. A lot of times the Bible helps us even understand these things even deeper, right? And we can use that structure from the models that we use and things like that, but understanding how the Bible talks about them can really help us to do better. So we want to understand your strengths, not general strengths. That's why there is an assessment in here. So we want to understand your strengths from an emotional intelligence standpoint. I will warn you, it's a quick and easy one. I didn't, there's much more in-depth ones. It's not random questions. It's not validity tested or nothing like that, but it's roughly right. So, I do have some experience writing questions and things like that. So it'll be roughly right and help us to learn, where our opportunities might be, and then develop an action plan. Remember the first quote, right? We got to take action. So we will start. We probably won't get through a well-written, fully fleshed out development plan, but I do have a framework in your handout there and we'll actually spend some time on starting that. And then of course, it usually takes a couple iterations anyways to get a good development plan and get it exactly where you want it, figure out what all actions. Sometimes it takes research to figure out what we want to do, right? How we want to get that need, whether it's training or other opportunities that we'll talk about here in a minute. So I wanted to ground us with entrepreneurial relationships. So we're talking about relationships. What does that mean? So these are just a list. Some of these may apply to you. Some of them may not apply to you. So obviously we all have different situations, but many of us have at least some of these, right? As a business owner, we're going to have at least a few on here. And then, it might grow over time. But as we're thinking about these topics, again, we're always trying to think about theory's awesome, but how do we use it? Well, you're going to use it in these relationships. So as you think about, when you fill out the assessment, when you're thinking about what areas you might want to improve or the areas you want to focus on, you're really trying to think about, where am I applying it, right? And so as the takeaway box on the right states, as our business grows, so are relationships. So it might be the number of the same relationships that we have. So customers is the obvious one that as you grow as a business, you're going to get more and more customers, right? But you may add some in there. So as you grow, you may have to start looking for investors. You may have to focus more on the financial end of it. You might get a team, right? If you don't have one now, as you grow, you may end up getting employees and a team that you now have to manage. It's another relationship to manage. So just as you, over time, you will get more relationships. So why focus on relationships? The reason I focus on this has kind of been an iteration over time. I've always been interested in relationships. So even as a kid, I observed relationships long before I got into this field. But just over time, I'm always searching for how can we simplify things? How can we make things more useful? And so the conclusion I ended up coming to, and now shifting my talent management work, is that relationships are the most important. So I'll make the case for that as we go down through. I'll start with the least compelling evidence and end with the most compelling evidence. So the case I'll make is for that relationships are our deepest purpose. So I'm not going to go into, I have a whole thought pattern around purpose and things like that. The one we hear the most about, which is important, is our life purpose or our God-given purpose. Those are certainly important. There's lots of people that do that better than I do, so I don't touch on that one so much, other than the fact that it's in the hierarchy. But my argument is that being in relationship is a deeper purpose than even that. And I think your purpose shifts over time, sometimes depending on your life experience, where you're going, where you're at in your business and in your life. So I'm going to make the argument that this is our deepest purpose. Not that the other ones are not important, they're very important. So the relationships, this is first, the least compelling evidence, this is me, right? So if you think about team structures over time, they've changed. We were networking teams and web teams, all those things, that's kind of changed over time. It can also change based on the situation you're in. So what size company you are, where your company's located, all those things might make a different decision on what's the best team or even organizational structure, because that's the other thing that's changed over time and depends on the situation that you might be in. The other things that kind of change in organizations quite a bit over the years is comp, benefits, right? We're always playing around with those, readjusting them, right? Recently, they really readjusted a lot with the war on talent and all that good stuff. The other thing that's really a hot topic right now is, in-person, hybrid, remote, and Sherry can talk about this more deeply and more fully than I can, but right, a lot of times she does run into issues with what we are seeing is like CEOs and senior leadership are more on the camp of bringing people back now, and people are more in the camp of going fully remote. So you're always trying to play with that, but that's a hot topic right now. But no matter any of those things, how they change, how they morph, how they change over time, situation, it really takes relationships to run a business, right? So that's the core and constant thing. So that's what I noticed, and that's one of the reasons why I focus on relationships, because they're always there. It always takes people working together to run the business. No matter what structure you put them in or how you organize it, it takes people. Also, in my experience, self-serving behaviors is one thing I noticed over time. I think it's the most detrimental thing that happens in organizations. And so it does a couple of things that makes it detrimental. One is most likely you're not getting the best options. Study after study shows that teams usually come up with better results than individuals. And there's lots of data out there to show that. So you're not likely to be getting, someone's operating in how do I get my next promotion? How do I get my accolades? They're not going to necessarily be worried about the best options, the best solutions. So that does it. And then you have people, of course, standing around the water cooler and trying to say, like, how am I going to deal with this person? He's irritating me, right? And there's all this talk and chatter, and then time spent trying to figure out how to overcome this person operating in those things. And so it really becomes a great reduction in productivity by all those different accolades. Team performance, I say always, maybe not always. If I searched hard enough, I might think of one time that I've worked with a team, but I do a lot of work with teams and trying to improve performance. Almost to a number, it ends up being a relationship issue. There might be other issues, might be process, might be policy, might be, choices that they made, but almost always there's a relationship getting in the way that prevented them from finding the best solutions and coming up with the best ideas. And so I'm almost always end up at least doing some on relationships. And then organizational development, from that standpoint, I do a lot of work in that area too. And if you ever want to not need me to come in and work with your teams, just have strong relationships. That's all you got to do, right? Because I teach a lot of different things. One of them is, just as a simple example, is feedback. So I have this really cool process. It's awesome. It helps reduce defensiveness and all those things that you try to do. But if you really don't want to have to use that, just have strong relationships. Then you don't have to be quite as careful as how you say things. People trust that you have their best interest in mind. And so that's the other reason why I say relationships are our most important thing. All right, any questions so far?
I do have a question. Can you flesh out that third point just a little bit more? 'Cause, yes, not to be contrary.
Yep, no, go ahead.
Flashed into my mind as you shared that was Chick-fil-A, for example, where they have both, where they're excellent at relationships, internal and external, but then they're also really good at the processes. Can you
Yeah.
explain what you mean by me? Because to me, because I know you don't mean processes.
Yeah.
Explain that a little
I'm
more.
not talking business process, I'm talking people process.
Okay.
So when I have feedback, I have a specific process, right? And the idea is to reduce defensiveness to get the other person to hear the feedback you want to give them. Yeah, business processes are super important. And if you want to improve them, yes, just have strong relationships.
Personal
Because then
processes.
everybody can challenge each other. No, Brian, I think that's a stupid idea. We should never do that, right? Right? And you can say it like that if I have a strong relationship, but if I don't have a strong relationship, then I got to go through the feedback process and
Build it,
make sure you
yeah.
don't make me mad and all that good stuff.
That makes more sense. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Any other questions? Great question. That's what we need to do. Iron sharpens iron, right? It's helpful for everyone. All right, so starting up, now moving on to the middle group of, compelling data. So mentorship, relationships, UPS, they do a lot of work with business and trying to help small businesses do better. And they did a study, and 70% of small business owners that receive mentoring survived more than 5 years. I think the SBA has it at 50%, right, with just overall in general. So that increases your odds of success quite a bit. And then social support, studies have shown that entrepreneurs with robust social support systems experience lower levels of burnout and higher levels of business success. So as we know, as a small entrepreneur, you wear many hats. It's pretty easy to get burnt out, right? So that social support is very important. And all of you are already participating in that, so we're encouraging you to keep doing that. That's one of the benefits of Noble, right? That's what they provide to us. They provide mentorship, as Chaz laid out earlier, and then social support too. You can rely on each other, run ideas past each other, get involved in multiple different ways. But this is good data for the importance of that in your business. So don't underestimate that. Sometimes we think, oh, I'm gonna be heads down in my office and really get stuff done and not bring my head up, right? Because I need to make sure that we're successful, but you're holding yourself back if you do that, and the stats kind of support that. So we encourage you to get out, be connected, get involved. Those are all important things. The other empirical data, this comes from a couple of studies, CDC website has it, but others support this concept too. Anything that you can die from, you will die from it earlier if you're lonely. And loneliness also increases the rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide. So there are actual physical elements to this as well. Because what is loneliness? Lack of relationship, right? You're not connected, you don't have others to support you. So it really is physically important as well, not just mentally, but physically, and not just business success, but just success in life. All right, and then of course, the most compelling evidence is going to come from Matthew 22:37-40. This is, probably everybody already knows this, but this is where, Jesus was asked to summarize what's the most important, right? So this is what he chose, right? And we know he was good at, responding and choosing the right thing to say. So this is what he left us with. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So he reduced it to those two things. And what are they? The relationship with him, relationship with others, right? And he puts himself first, not because, I think the reason he puts himself first is because he's the example. We've all heard lead by example, right? It's very important. So that's why, but he ties them close together, right? He doesn't say this one's first, this one's second even, right? He says, it's like this is the first and the greatest commandment, and the second is like it. So he ties them pretty close together, maybe 1A, 1B, I don't know for sure, but right, he ties them very close together. So he very much is focused on wanting us to have a relationship with him and with each other. And then the last one I'll share here is from John 13:34-35. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. So he knew what was going to happen after the Last Supper, right? We know that for sure. So he's probably thinking, right, I'm going to leave them with a very important piece of advice. Not just a piece of advice, but a very important piece of advice. So that's what he chose to say. And he wanted them to be the example too, just as he probably wants us to be the example of having strong connections and strong relationships. All right, so why do we need EI? I'm going to ask the class to answer this. Why do you think we need EI? Why don't we all just get along? One movie quote, I don't remember which movie, but why can't we all just get along? I just want a few answers. Yeah.
We're coming from different perspectives.
Yes, absolutely. Pride, yes, absolutely.
We may think one person thinks one way and we
look totally wrong, like, we think we're speaking English and they're hearing Italian.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes,
Personality types.
absolutely.
Have more dynamic interactions.
Yeah, very good.
Intense circumstances and tragedy. And kinds of
Yes.
things.
Very good, yes.
I was just gonna say empathy, how to realize where people are coming from.
Yes, that's gonna be critical. We'll talk a lot about empathy. So very good observation. All right, so that's pretty good. I've condensed it into categories. Some of the categories you hit some of the things in those categories, but just to help us think through about it a little bit. So we've talked pride, that's sin, that's probably one of the most detrimental ones. So we do live in a broken world, we know that. So there's sin, right? And that kind of gets in the way of us having a good, strong relationship with each other without working on it and thinking about it, right? And then personality came up. Yeah, we all have different personalities, right? There's even personality tests you can take to figure out some of the patterns and how we're different. But even those don't explain everything, right? They just explain a small piece of it. It's good to know, it's interesting, but it's don't explain all of it. And then life situations. Class got that one as well. Who knows what happened to somebody? You might had something tragic happen to you during your interactions. You don't interact the way you would hope to. Next thing you know, right, the interaction doesn't go like we would have liked it to. And then we are designed for survival. And this is an important part because this is a lot of times where we also get that reaction where we either have a reaction or someone else has a reaction and we're like, whoa, what happened there? Like, how did that happen, right? And we're not sure about it. Most likely it was because we're designed for survival. So kind of two aspects to that. There was a study done around holding on to negative information. And what they did was they had a medical procedure. They had two groups. They went to the first group and they explained it all from a positive perspective. So basically the procedure had a 70% chance of success, 30% chance of something going wrong. So they explained to the first group, the 70%, that's all they focused on. 70%, this is what will be good, this will be great, right? The second group, they focused on the 30%, this is what could go wrong, all those kind of things. So as you can imagine, right, you probably already predict that the 70% group said, yeah, that's pretty cool. The 30% said, no way. Well, then they followed it up with going back to the 70% group. And they said, well, you know, we've told you about all the things that could go good, but here are the 30% that could go wrong. They changed their mind. No, I'm not too happy about that procedure now anymore. We went back to the second group and they explained the 70% success rate, things that would go good, reasons why it would be no problems. They still didn't like it. So we hold on to that negative information. What they concluded was it's very important, even in today's world, but certainly as we were, back in prehistoric days and things like that, it's important for us to hold on to that negative information because it keeps us out of trouble. Keeps us alive sometimes, right? So we know what to stay away from. We know the stove is hot as a kid when we're growing up. We remember that. We know not to touch it. That's the simple example that we use a lot. But that's why, so we hold on to that negative information a lot longer. And this isn't about feedback, but that's why we say, have you ever heard 6 to 1, 6 positives to 1 negative feedback? That's why, because we're holding on to that negative aspect that we hear. And then the other one is just probably heard of fight or flight before. A lot of heads nodding, yeah, fight or flight. Sometimes you see it fight, flight, or freeze. So it's really, that's just how our brain operates. This brain surgeon would argue with me, but basically you have 3 main parts of your brain. And the smallest part is where you take in information first. That's good because it processes information super, super quick. However, what it doesn't do is process it very fully, because if you're in a life-threatening situation, you don't have time to figure all that out. You just have to react in some way. So that's the other thing is, so unfortunately, sometimes we don't distinguish between, something that truly is life-threatening and someone just coming up to me after a presentation saying, Bryan, you could have handled that a little bit better, right? I sometimes react the same way and then I get defensive. Oh, what are you talking about? You're threatening my whole ego, right? And so that's why you run into that fight or flight situation where sometimes someone's reacting, you're like, wait a minute, that wasn't my intent at all, right? So sometimes that is, and that's why we sometimes have a feedback process, right? To help diminish that, but as I stated earlier, the stronger the relationship is, the more unnecessary that process and being careful becomes. So that's why it's important to build that strong relationship. All right, any questions here? Are there any questions online?
There was. Oh. Miss Mary Jenkins had added, and I didn't bring her up, but when you were talking about people's feedback and different
Yep.
emotions are unstable.
Yes.
That's what she
Oh,
wanted to bring
absolutely.
into the
Yes, that's a
why
good one. Yeah, thank you.
emotional
Yeah,
intelligence.
anytime someone has something online, you can just shout it out. And we can get to it later. I'm okay with that, because when I'm on a Zoom, I'm the one who can't find my mute button too quickly. And so I'm always saying, yeah, 2 minutes ago when we said that. So don't feel bad about that at all. All right, any other questions? All right, so what is emotional intelligence? And so now we're going to get into kind of the tool and the nuts and bolts of it. So what do we think, though, about emotional intelligence levels? I want you to predict. I, of course, I've looked at the studies, so I got the book answer. But what do we think? Do we think it's going up or going down?
If you look at social media, you say down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, emotions are going up, it's just the intelligence. part.
Yeah. That's a good answer. Yes. Why do we think that is? Why is our emotional intelligence going down?
Emotional beings, so of course we respond or react to everything emotionally. What is it? I heard someone say that logic, emotion buys and logic pays for it, so the intelligence piece is the logic piece, right? So we typically respond or react initially emotionally, and then the intelligence piece is kind of working through that, digesting it. And I don't think there's a lot of digestion on social media. I think it's a lot of as it first hits you.
Yeah.
So I think also people then assume that that's how everybody thinks. That's how everybody feels. That's not how everybody thinks.
Yes.
So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
I think it's the risk that if you say something that it could go awry, and that's one person, but then they can blast it to everybody, and all of a sudden you got a whole army to deal with.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
I think the ability to think critically is very, not happening. And I also think that the ability to discern between one and the other thing is not happening.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Susie?
I think a lot of it is because of the breakdown of language and the cancel culture. I think people are trying to be more loving by saying anything goes, but that also allows for a lot more varied emotions and things to be a mess.
Yes.
Truth, what is truth with that language barrier? It's just undefined. So many things now. The
Agree.
culture wants to accept them to be undefined.
Agree. Anyone online?
Yeah, I'm asking. Oh, okay. Miss Mary has something. Just unmute, Mary, and let's hear your voice. Okay, I'll read it for her. Maybe she's doing
Okay.
something else. With more wanting to improve mental health and the level of emotional intelligence, in her opinion, is increasing. She has a cold, so she's
Okay.
going
Oh,
to
that's
have me
fair.
say.
Yep. Then Chaz?
Well, there's no question that younger folks are more tolerant, okay? But I think they tend to get so much of their knowledge or opinions off of social media. And so that means you've got a broad range of people that are throwing whatever kind of information out there. And it isn't necessarily factual or whatever, and so I think the EI from social media just tends to, in general, pull people down.
A lot of sharing, not much sorting going on.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're in a system now, a planned system to decrease critical thinking. Because then they can feed us what they want and we can be robots. No longer think for ourselves. Then we allow emotions to rise, conflict happens. And So I think part of it, and I'm not blaming it, I'm not saying this is all the system, but we are in a system, especially now where it's like, there is an effort to bring that down and kind of control the narrative. People are just buying into it, and it's, yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, we're being taught that everything is about ourselves, which is contradictory to what we just read in Matthew 22. So when it comes to being, you only live once, just live however, and it's all about you, don't worry about anyone else. It goes against the whole premise of emotional intelligence.
Tolly has something.
Okay.
Hi, this is Julie over on Zoom. I would also add that a lot of times, like we were talking about with social media, when we're communicating, our emotions are in part communicated by emojis. And many times you can communicate with an emoji, but you don't actually feel the emoji that you're sending. And so it causes like that breakdown in communication where a lot of emotion is being able to see someone's face and someone's body and how they interact and how they respond to what you're saying or what you're doing.
All of that can be misread.
Yes.
Is her emoji a middle finger?
What?
Is her emoji a middle finger?
No, she's got her hand raised. It's just the record button is it's pulling out the other fingers. It's funny.
Why are you mad at us?
It totally be misread. It does look like it.
Yeah,
It
that's a
does,
great
'cause there's-
example, right? Something as simple as that, it's easy to misinterpret it. For those of you online, you can't see it, but she has an emoji with her hand up, which is something you do when you want to say something or ask a question. And then there's a record button and a little star button, I don't know what it is, Wi-Fi or something, blocking out the other fingers except for.
And see, I didn't even know that, so I wouldn't be planning to convey that emotion.
Got it.
Yeah.
Great example.
So sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, right? That's a great example of how that can get misinterpreted. Very good. Thank you for bringing that. That's awesome. Yeah, so you really hit on what the studies have shown. The studies kind of focus, and we've hit on some things that I'm predicting. So we'll see if we're right, a couple of years from now. But the things that the study mostly attributed it to was social media, which we talked about quite a bit and did a great job of explaining the different issues with that. We saw one real time there. And then the other thing that they talked about was, of course, the pandemic, which I agree with, right? It kept us apart from people, and now we're, I think we're still trying to get more comfortable with being with people more often. And that's, I think, shows up. Yes.
I'm just noticing that you also have levels increasing, and we've talked about a lot of the levels why it's decreasing, but I think there is an increasing awareness of mental health needs in our society, as well as seeing a counselor is becoming more okay.
Yes.
And so there are ways that we're trying to accommodate or do better, I think, and all of the research, development, and speakers like yourself.
Yeah, and I think, so that's a great point. And I think the studies are saying it's not working. And then this is where my theory comes in of why it's not working. Of course, we're touched by the mental health issue in our family. So, of course, that's an important topic to me. But I think our response is maybe not exactly what it needs to be. And I hesitated there because I think that it can be difficult to respond to. So I think we are more aware of it. If someone calls in and says, I need a mental health day, we're more open to it. I think all that's good. But the trap you get into is then, how much do you help the person overcome it and work through it and learn to build the muscles to overcome it? Yeah. And how much do you let it go? I think we're a little bit towards the just saying everything's okay. And then I think the social media concerns that the group already brought up really attributes to that too, because we do want to say, you do you, right? So whatever you say or do is okay. And we don't challenge each other and say, wait a minute, I know you're having troubles, but then, go seek help, go get counseling. It's more available now. It's more accepted now, right? So I think those are the things that are preventing us, even though we have more focus, it is more accepted, I think those are preventing us from getting the progress that we would hope to get. And so I think that we really just need to find a way, and that's one reason why emotional intelligence is important, to be able to respond in an appropriate way, but yet still be able to challenge people, right? So, very good. Any other comments or questions on this? Yes, go ahead.
I like the example of the hand raise because it just shows the fact that a person can perceive something. And if they don't have all the pieces of information, it can become a misunderstanding. And until they talk about it and listen to each other, it can be a conflict.
That is awesome. Because, right, what happens if we just all walk out here and say, can you believe what she did? She's flipping us off. Never realizing there's no middle finger emoji, right? But
Good thing my picture's not up, so you can't recognize me.
and corrected, and very disappointedly. But that's right, we have to talk about it, right? We have to say, wait a minute, are you giving us the middle finger? What's going on? Okay, and it gives opportunity for clarification, right? Maybe the answer is yes, I am. And here's the 3 reasons why, right? But maybe it's no, I didn't know there was something on the screen.
I think the other thing is the written word in text can be so misconstrued. And when you're meeting somebody, like I'm in a situation like that and I'm texting and I don't know this person, I'm like, and I get this one sentence, I go, oh no, you know, how am I gonna autocorrect that?
Oh,
I'm
autocorrect,
like, you know, like, can we just at least talk by phone?
That is great advice. Early in when I started doing coaching, I was coaching a supervisor on the shop floor. And he had done a big project and the plant director wrote him a really nice email. And just it wasn't at the very end, but towards the end of it, you know, he had also gave him some guidance and things to think about next time, but then went on to say how great it was. And he's like, I can't believe he did that. And I knew the leader and I knew the leader's thoughts and feelings about that project. And so I said, let me read the email. And it was like glaring praise, really awesome. And then a little bit of advice on something to think about. And that's all he focused on. This is exactly like you were saying. It's all he focused. So you're not the only one, right? That's why he focused on. So it's real. All right, good discussion on that. Any other thoughts or questions? All right. Then a few stats to really kind of get you excited about this topic and pay attention to it and actually do the work I'm going to ask you to do. So there was a study done on emotional intelligence, and I won't read it word for word, but basically in a nutshell, what it's saying is that, you know, when you look at high performing people in organizations and low performing people, EI shows up a lot in the high performing people and not so much in the low performing people, right? So that really helps them to connect and be more successful. And then kind of the same one on this one is kind of tied to that too. And then this one is to scare you just a little bit as we get into our assessment, but 95% of us think we're really awesome at self-awareness. As it turns out, we're not, right? So, you know, kind of keep that in mind and always be kind of checking yourself and thinking about self-awareness, because that really does help to set the stage. And we'll talk about that from a competency standpoint when we get to the EI model. So hopefully you've printed this out online or have it with you here. This is the test, so to speak. It's really an assessment, but I like the word test just to scare people. So you have that in here, and basically what you're going to do is respond to each statement. So you can see here on the page, right? It has a statement, and I did break it down just for ease of the use in our discussion and conversation into the different blocks. So you'll see those as we play along, like the blue bars and the green bars will end up being the model that we look at. So that's a little bit of a preview, but you're going to rate 1 is rarely, 5 is almost always. So you're going to give yourself a score on the right-hand side there for each one of those. And so go down through, and then I'll talk more about scoring it in general. So first, go down through each of them. There's 24 items. So go down through and give yourself, so you're thinking only about yourself, give yourself a score on each of those items. If you have questions as you work through it, let me know. Two pages to it. Make sure you fill out both. Thinking has been
Always tested the motion.
All right, as you get through that, you still have some time, so don't panic. But if you've gotten through that, then what we're gonna do is average each of those. So off to the very far right of the paper, you can see you're just averaging each of those two. So each of the competencies, those are gonna end up being competencies, that's the green bar. Each of those has two statements that you responded to. So add those two together, divide by 2, and you'll have the average. So I apologize for making you do math, but
It's still divided by 2.
exactly,
Too bad.
it shouldn't be.
If you have a 4 and a 5, what do you put?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What do you put?
I would put, yeah, 4.5.
Okay, all
Yeah, you can use decimals for that.
right. Boy, you're really.
I know now.
Yeah,
But just only go to like the third or fourth decimal.
0.5000.
All right, and as you get through that, again, take your time. We have plenty of time to finish this up. I'm not rushing anybody, but if you've gotten through that, then you're gonna come up with two subtotals, one from each page, and then have your overall total.
Totaling the averages, we're totaling the.
You're totaling the
Score.
averages, yeah.
We are.
Sorry.
No, we couldn't.
Got a bunch of fives here, but I'm not getting any, I'm still low.
Yeah.
The score, the scoring.
I was thinking
Average
like,
score.
okay, all right, so it's total, okay, shoot.
Aver- Score, not the averages, score the raw
Scoring
score
results
for
is
each
the,
one,
is
yeah.
the raw, not the average,
Yeah.
got it.
But what these guys are noticing, I did put in the middle of the scoring page, low, medium, high.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put too much stock in that, honestly, for two reasons. One is just my rule on assessments is we don't care about the score. We just care about finding what we're gonna work on,
Yeah.
right? And then the other thing is this, as I gave the caveat earlier, this is really not a scientific study, right? That's gone through any validity tests or anything like that. But I figured there would be at least one person who just couldn't move on without knowing if they were low, medium, high. So I just kind of broke it up in even increments.
I can read you the math,
Yeah, I agree.
easy enough. Since we're on math today, I was not told ahead there would be math, by the way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we did that on purpose because we wanted
They
to
are
see what your
laughing at you
response
online, I'm
was.
just telling you. You can't hear them, but they're laughing. They're laughing.
We're adding the, not the averages, but
Yeah, the score, the overall.
Or the non-scientific ranking, where you stand,
Exactly.
you suck your head.
Yeah, I got it.
I couldn't be clearer on that.
Okay, good.
That's good. I'm thinking like,
Oh, no, that, yeah. No, we're gonna need. Yeah, the question was, did we do the average for nothing? No, you did not.
okay,
We're gonna get to those in a minute. It's gonna, that'll actually be more important than the overall score. In my mind.
Right, if you're perfect at something, you don't need to improve it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you could.
you could, right?
It's probably not your best focus area.
No.
Yeah. Oh. Oh, nice. You're doing it. All right, as you get through that, I want you to go back, this where what you want to do is pick up, the area that you want to work on. So here is where I want you to use the average. So you're gonna pick a category to work on, not, an individual item, if you know what I mean. So the competencies are in the green bars. So I want you to see what are your three lowest, what are your three highest. So that's at the top of the scoring sheet, so that, and there you are gonna use the average versus the individual. Yeah, absolutely. So if you look on the scoring sheet, there's a section that says 3 highest scoring items. There's another section below that says 3 lowest scoring items. Now you're going to go to the average, because what we're gonna try to do in this thing is, like, the green bars are the competencies, and you'll see that in the model next. But I wanted to share this first, so you didn't have as much knowledge, so you answered differently. So the green bars is what you're trying to figure out, which green bars are my highest and which green bars are my lowest. So that's why you're gonna use the average. And you might have a tie depending, right? You might have a lot of ties, it just all depends. So if you do have a tie for them, just kind of pick the ones you feel like will be your 3 strongest, which one you think will be the 3 that you would most likely to work on or need to improve. So I'll leave it up to you to decide which of the competencies you end up focusing on.
Pretty much right on.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Good.
On the strengths especially. Yeah.
Good. That's good, because like I said, I just put this together for this, because, the instruments that have been through all those scientific validations are really more intense, more involved, and take a lot longer to fill out and score. And all that.
Right.
So, obviously, we didn't have time for that. All right, does everybody have that, or does anybody need more time? Okay, another minute?
Yeah, for the math. Maths.
Multiple math.
Yes.
Focus on the average. Wherever your lowest ones and wherever your highest ones are. All right, I think we're ready to move on. Are we ready to move on? Okay, good. So I wanted you to go through this for a couple of reasons before we learn the model. Sometimes, especially a simplistic assessment like this, right? We try to get the answer we want. So that's why I had you do it first. One of the reasons. The second reason I had you do it first was because now as we go through that, you already have an idea of where, we haven't picked it down to the last one, but you still have an idea where you're strong, you have an idea where you might want to improve. And so as we go through the model now, you'll be able to see that, because again, as a reminder, the green bars are going to be the competencies that we look at. The model. That was the second page. So here's the model. You can Google this and you'll find lots and lots of different models, and they're broken up differently. I chose this one because it's my favorite and I got to choose. I made slides. So it's my favorite for a couple reasons. I think it does the best job of adhering to the original framework and explaining where things fall and why they fall there. And as I describe it in more detail, you'll hopefully, understand that more deeply. And then the other reason is one of my professors at Case Western was part of coming up with that, Richard Boyatzis. So I have two reasons to have this one be my favorite, but we will go down through all these, but these are the different categories. So if you look at the left side, that's really about yourself, right? Being able to be aware, self-aware, and understand your emotions, and then being able to regulate them. And then on the right side is more about others, right? Could be a person, could be a group of people, right? It just depends on the situation, but it's being socially aware and aware of others' emotions. And then, of course, being able to regulate or manage that, or relationship management as the model titles it. And then down here in the lower part, those are the green bars, or the competencies, right? And so that's the idea behind this model. Any questions on the overall model before we go in? We are going to go into each one of these in more depth. So just understanding like how it's laid out. Is everybody good to move on there? Seeing head nods. All right. So starting off with social or self-awareness, this is really about being in tune with our feelings. A lot of times, understanding what our triggers are can be helpful. Like if we know we get upset about one thing versus another, sometimes that can be very helpful to us. There's a physical response to your emotions, so knowing what those are. Like I carry my stress to my jaw, so I know if my jaw's getting tight, I'm getting stressed out, right? So those are some things you can use to be more self-aware and catch it earlier, right? So before you go into fight or flight mode and say, oh, someone told you some suggestions about your presentation, and I get all unwound, right? I can catch it before that, right? So that's the idea of that. And then being able to talk about your feelings is very important. Sometimes, something we have to learn over time, but at the same time, it's very important to be able to talk about your feelings, identify those. Sometimes even sharing them in the moment can help to make the interaction go better. And then having an accurate self-assessment, I just told you about, how bad we are at that, but getting better is good. So I think having an accurate self-assessment, whenever I do executive coaching, this is one of the areas I focus on a lot. And sometimes it'll come out in assessment. So if you've ever taken 360s, they almost always have a self-rating, right? That's why we are looking for, can you accurately assess yourself, right? And the reason, let's guess why that should be. So I always describe it like you have to have clear colored glasses. So we all heard rosy colored glasses, right? Whatever I do is awesome, I'm great. And then we have what I call smoke colored glasses, which means nothing I do is right? Those are the extremes. Of course, we're trying to get you to the middle. What is the danger with rosy colored glasses?
Your problems.
Yep, can't see your problems.
You become really kind of into your own biases, so you kind of don't take in as many inputs. So
Yeah, and then just reinforce yourself. Somebody over here, I heard.
I just said distorted view.
Yep, distorted view, absolutely.
You
Anyone?
you
Go
fail
ahead.
you fail to see the log in your eye.
Ah, very good. Love that one. I'm going to put that one on a slide. I like that. Yeah, that's very true, right? So being able to actually self-assess you. What about the dark colored glasses? What's wrong with that?
It's not fully true.
Yes, not fully true.
Your
Eeyore, yep, just demotivated, Eeyore type reactions.
Become anxious.
Yeah, it can cause stress, anxiety. And what aren't we likely to do if everything is wrong? We aren't likely to be able to figure out what those areas are we can develop, right? We end up in Eeyore syndrome where everything's wrong, right? And it's too much and we get stressed and it's too much to deal with. And next thing you know, we don't try to develop more self-awareness, right? So that's why those are important. And then self-confidence helps us. And this isn't, arrogance. This is just being confident in yourself, being willing to say, hey, I'm getting a little bit upset here in this conversation, identify those feelings, being confident enough that you can handle it, right? And you can work through it with the other person. That's why the self-confidence is important, because it really helps set you up for, that dialogue that you might need, right? To have a better conversation and a deeper conversation. All right, any questions on self-awareness?
I have a question.
Yes.
It's totally fine in telling you this is off, but I'm always curious about that line between confidence and arrogance.
Yeah, I think no, that's not off at all, because that really is important to think about, because I think self-confident is being able to balance that, relying on that you are putting confidence in that you can deal with the situation. Less so than my knowledge, right? So I think once it starts to bleed into arrogance is I'm right, I'm the expert, right? And that's why I start with iron sharpens iron, right? I don't know all the ideas. We had a couple ideas I didn't even think of ever before, right? So it's that kind of a thing where we're putting our confidence in being able to deal with the situation, deal with others, work through things, right? Versus, thinking we are gonna solve the problem on our own, or we have all the knowledge. I'm not sure.
Good.
Mary had one online. She said one risks seeing themselves higher or lower in their way of being than they
Yes.
really are.
Absolutely. Good. Renee?
Yeah, there's a book that's coming out, and you may or may not agree with what you just shared. I agree with what you're saying. It's just a different perspective. It's called, something about like how God can, so therefore she can. It's a female, driven book, a Christian book. But I guess self-confidence, I wonder if we believe the scripture that says that I can do all things through Christ, then if we are living through Christ, then should not we all have the self-confidence because we're one with him, and therefore we can walk in confidence. But when we go and we think, well, I can do it, that's arrogance. Can that be like a...
Absolutely, I would 100% agree with that. Yes, we're putting it not only so that takes it to the next step, right? Not only are we just confident that we can get through the situation, but we're getting through with God. And right, with God's guidance, obviously he's gonna put in our heart. That's one thing about that's really cool about the Bible for me anyways. It does a lot of different things where it tries to get your heart right. And then I often say, if your heart and your intentions are right, the words are gonna come. Right? The actions are gonna come, the reactions are gonna come more naturally, so you don't have to sit there and think about every last word. So I would absolutely add that in there, that doing it with God is a really good approach. I think we were here and then up here. Go ahead. Okay, sorry. I wasn't sure who was first. Go ahead.
I thought someone over there was.
He's letting you go.
Okay, so mine is less about the self-confidence, arrogance conversation, but I'm looking at the accurate self-assessment. So one of the things that my executive coach did a few years ago was she forced me to journal. Why am I feeling the way I'm feeling in this situation? Was there a trigger? Somewhere back in my past that's causing me to feel this way in this new situation. So I wanted to bring that out to ask you what your thoughts are about that.
100% agree. You'll see it on the slide towards the end. So kudos to her, one, for forcing you to do something.
I get a quarter. I get a quarter.
Yeah. And two, the journaling. I love it.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
So, on that same notion, I don't know if you guys know who Jordan Peterson is, but online personality, psychologist. He actually has this program called the self-authoring. And it's very similar to what you just discussed. It's kind of like you look through your past, right? And it gives you these prompts and asks you these questions. You have like 15 minutes to respond. And you're just going through whatever you can remember. And then moves to the next thing, and moves to the next thing. Eventually, at the end, you have this book about yourself.
Oh, wow.
And it's this amazing thing. My friend recommended it a couple of years ago, and it really did help me because I do struggle with my own self-awareness, understanding my emotions. The way I was raised was kind of limiting in that sense. And so I highly recommend you guys take that program. It's only like $20.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
It's called the self-authoring program. It's self-authoring.com.
I'm very familiar with Jordan Peterson, but I hadn't heard that, so thank you.
Yeah,
for
it doesn't
sharing
really
that. Sounds really good.
advertise it very much. But
Could you say it again, self-authoring?
yeah, self-authoring. There's past, I think there's present, future, and then virtues.
So it's authoring.com.
Yes.
Totally simple. Very cool. See, iron sharpens iron, right? Okay.
I think it's beautiful irony that, because I wrestled with both extremes. 21, I thought I knew everything, which clearly I didn't. So that was the arrogant side of things. And then the pendulum swung like humility of like always deferring to others, and a lack of self-confidence. What I find to be ironic is that the self-confidence that I think is most lasting, scripturally based, is when our confidence is from Scripture, from the one who made us, and from those who love us, with no skin, no angles, no hooks. Flattery can feel like they're attributing to your confidence, but it's with an end in mind that benefits them.
Yes.
Whereas those that are truly encouraging others and like pouring encouragement, building courage is based off of what's real. It's not off of what you feel. It's based on what they observe to be true. And so I've grown in self-confidence over the past 5-7 years by trusting, Scripture says, trusting the people that are pouring into me and not myself so much. And what ended up happening is that I have extreme self-confidence compared to the extreme that I was in before. And I'd say strong self-confidence. And it's different than arrogance because I'm always learning, always open to something, but my confidence is not based on who I think I am. It's based on what Scripture says I am and on people who love me, who constructively criticize to build me up. That's where my truth comes from, not from me. And then that self-confidence is unshakable at that point.
Very good. I like that perspective. Yeah. All right, there's someone online with their hand up. So
Yes, it's me again with my 5 hands up, 5 fingers up. I was actually coming on to say the same thing that gentleman just mentioned about arrogance versus confidence. And confidence, the way I see it and the way I've experienced it, is being rooted in my identity in Christ. So knowing who God says I am, but also the ability that God has given me to do certain things and the opportunities he's given me to improve my craft in many different areas, versus arrogance, which I think is very self and very inward rooted, and then it also impacts, I guess, how you relate with other people and kind of putting them down or lifting them above yourself. So I feel like confidence is a lot more, I don't know, there's more of a humility to confidence because it's like I recognize that this is all not my doing, it's who God created me to be, and I am this because I'm standing on Christ and everything he's availed to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
We get in our own way with arrogance, and we're not able to be to live out the purposes that he's given for us. Whereas with self, that's why he told Joshua, I don't know how many times before he went to the promised land, be strong and courageous. He was building him up so he could get out of his own way so that the Father could work through him, and then the results speak for themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, good. All right, good discussion. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think self-confidence is just what I'm learning from like all these awesome points. Is self-confidence is kind of like language that describes what other people recognize as someone that has like a sense of like assurance, and what goes on, what in their other relationships. They know that they kind of have a sense they can't really do anything wrong because you have the assurance in Christ behind you, and you know that no matter what happens, you still have that. So I think there's something to be said for what other people recognize as confidence versus what's actually indeed an underlying problem where if you don't have self-confidence, it can be the fact that you don't have that. So maybe it's when someone isn't confident, they don't have that assurance, and it's just not a personality trait so much.
Yeah. All right, good job with that one. I appreciate the questions and the additional thoughts. So here we get some ideas on self-awareness, of course, from the Bible, Lamentations 3:40. Let us examine our ways and test them. So there he's obviously encouraging us to be self-aware and look at it. And what are we supposed to test them against? Let us return to the Lord, right? So it is, and I think a lot of the dialogue that came out here, right? I think this is a good scripture that kind of supports that kind of thought process. We're not testing on our own understanding and our own thoughts, right? We're testing it with the Lord. So I think that's good. All right. Now, this is a model on emotions. And just to describe the model first, across the top are the highest intensity feelings, the ones that are used more often, probably happy, sad, angry, afraid, ashamed. And then down the left side, we have high, medium, and low intensity. So this is talking about intensity of feelings. If you Google emotional wheels and all that kind of stuff, you'll get lots and lots of hits on it. Valuable, they're good. I think it's just good to do that. This is my favorite one, even though it's an older one too. This is my favorite one, and I'll see. Can anybody guess why I like this one better? So the wheel is just like listing out emotions. And this one,
It organizes it.
it organizes it, absolutely. Organizes it better. And for me, the intensity piece is critical. So this model here does the intensity piece more fully. So play along and see if you can predict why. Let's say I'm upset about something, right? And I jump to anger, because that's kind of what we do sometimes. Even if we're not in fight or flight mode that I talked about before, we're more likely to jump to that top row, right? And say, I'm angry about this. Well, ask yourself, am I really angry about this? Well, maybe not, right? Maybe there's something that's not happening that I want to happen, or something, right? And I'm getting frustrated about it. Well, frustrated, you can maybe argue which ones, but I think overall the model has it right in the intensity. Frustrated is only really a medium emotion. So I'm completely jumping to anger because that's one I most recognize. If I don't build my vocabulary of emotions, right? And then I'm going to have a different reaction. I'm going to have a much different reaction if I'm frustrated versus where I'm angry. And this is where that other bullet point comes into play, where I recommended to talk about your feelings, right? So you're in a situation, things aren't going the way you wanted them to, you're getting very frustrated. Well, identify that at that point. It's much easier to deal with when you're frustrated. Say, wow, this is really frustrating me. Let's talk about why, right? Or you see someone else getting frustrated, right? Ooh, you seem frustrated about this. Is that true? Because you don't want to be assigning emotions to people. So check in with them. And then if it is true, let's talk about why. So we don't end up in anger. Good idea to really kind of increase your vocabulary around emotion and more accurately identify what's going on in any given situation. There might be a situation where you do get angry, right? And that's part of life. But usually once we're up there, it's really hard to deal with in any of them, right? So sad is another one, right? Once you get depressed, it's much harder to deal with it, right? And so we have to increase our vocabulary with emotions, and then we can deal with them earlier on. Yes.
I'm sure you'll get to this later, but I've been in multiple conversations over the course of my life where someone else's feelings are projected on me. Like, John, you seem frustrated. And I'm thinking, you seem seething or outraged or voice. And I'm not, that's not a perception. I mean, like, that's what you're communicating. Are you gonna get to projection later? Is that something that's opening a whole can of worms?
That's opening a whole new can of worms,
Okay.
but let's open it a little bit. We won't spend 20 minutes on it, but let's open it up a little bit. Because there is a solution to that. What would the group recommend you do in that situation?
Talk about his feelings.
Yes, absolutely.
So I respond with, no,
Yeah.
I'm fine.
I'm probably gonna suggest,
You're the one that's
I'm
frustrated.
saying
Because
because you said in the exam, as you laid the example out, so I'm gonna hold you to that.
Yeah.
You said you were frustrated because they were seething, oh yeah, seething is up here.
Oh, I wasn't frustrated. I was saying, they were saying I was frustrated.
They were
I wasn't at all.
misidentifying that.
But they were in the
Okay.
seething part of things, emotionally speaking, but were projecting on me
Yes.
that I was the one that was frustrated, and I wasn't at all. I was
Alright.
sitting there quietly listening, taking notes, So,
So
that's the
let's,
projection piece.
all right, let's play with it in that context. Thank you. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I just had an instance with this. I ran into a friend that I don't see as often as I used to, okay? And we're a lot alike, okay? But just in the last few years, kind of I'm in a new season, he's in a different season, and so we're kind of in different places than we used to be pretty close in a lot of ways. And we were talking, I'll say it, we were talking and Caitlin Clark came up. Anybody know who Caitlin Clark is? This week, she'll probably become the greatest women's college basketball player scorer of all time, okay? She just has to get like another 50 points or something like that. She could be the greatest female basketball player of all time in the future. Well, but she also gets a lot of drama, okay? And she can be, and so my friend, normally I would have agreed with him. 5 years ago, he's like, oh, I don't like her. She's not this. She's not, da. And there was an instance at the Iowa State game when they played, and that's a problem.
Oh, yeah. I see.
And but I'm in a different place now. I was saying how, and I disagreed with him. But then I'm like, I don't want him to disagree with me. So I left, and then I, of course, sent him a text. It's a mile long, explaining my side. He thought it was an attack on him when I was trying to explain where I was coming from, and it took him to that. I don't know what. I'm furious.
Right?
And it's like, then I heard back and said, we're in 2 different places in our lives. We're not friends anymore. We're not alike anymore. I'm like, damn. I'm just trying to explain where I was coming from.
That's my point.
Oh, man. Thank goodness after a little bit of dialogue, I got him to go to lunch with me next Thursday.
So in person, fix it in person.
Can you take the chart with you and say?
Refrigerator.
You're on the right track.
Speaking about what he said, when you are at that point when you're trying to communicate with another person, and like I said, they both were could be a misunderstanding of what each other were trying to say, because is that focusing on, I'm only listening to what I'm trying to say versus what someone else is trying to say, and there's no willing to understand that there are more than one perspective. You don't have to agree, you can disagree, but it's like that issue within us that it's like, we want to be right, or we want to be able to only voice our part of view and not really listen to the other person.
Yeah, that's where that can get us in a lot of trouble when we pick a position and we defend it at all costs, or we want to be right too much. That can lock us into not having that dialogue that Chaz will have with his friend, at lunch.
This is helping me with this meeting. Yeah.
Good. So yeah, I think those do get you in trouble.
So how do we deal with that when that happens?
Are you going to answer that?
No, but I wanted to add another layer to that, because how does stonewalling play into this too? Because a lot of times a person just closed off. Is that like a move towards healthier emotions because you're processing without lashing back? Or is that a worse way of processing your emotions
So I'll give
because
you
you're avoiding or something?
typical organizational development answer. It just depends. Isn't that helpful?
Yeah.
So I think dealing with the issue as close to it as you can is better, but might not be the right time. If they're seething, right, or outraged, maybe there needs to be a cooling off period and then coming back to it, right? So I think that's what I would say to the stonewalling. And I think it's just, if it happens over time, I think it's just identifying it and kind of not saying, well, they're mad, so I'm not gonna talk to them anymore, right? You just have to say, who cares if I'm right? So this gets back to your question, right? It's not about being right, it's about the relationship. So one of my main principles, as I do more just around relationships in general, is the relationship matters most, right? So if you keep that as a mindset, right, you're gonna let go a little bit more of I need to be right, I need to defend my position, and more about the relationship and navigating towards whatever the topic is or goal that you're trying to get to, and that helps kind of free you up from that.
It also helps to say, if you're in that position, you feel like you need this time to voice it so that the other person knows, okay, I'm whatever that letter is or the word is, and we'll readdress it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think coming back to the question about, do we take the chart? That's a good question. Probably not. So going back.
So I should have said this to him.
Probably not. So I think the strategy is because we always have to be careful, right, when we have these conversations. So no, I would not suggest, he says, I think you're frustrated, and you're like, I'm not, no, but I appreciate you checking in with me. So have true, sincere love that he like took the time to identify that, even though it wasn't accurate, doesn't matter. But if you suspect they're, especially if you suspect they're up here, it's probably not a vibe saying, okay, I remember Bryan's slide. I think he's like somewhere between ceiling and grade. So maybe I'll pick this one. Probably don't pick one. So I think a better response would be, no, honestly, I'm not frustrated, but you seem pretty passionate about this topic, right? And I learned that one many years ago, before I even got into this field. We were in a big all location, it wasn't the whole company, but the whole location. The plant leader was up front sharing some information. It was one of those things where someone stands up in the crowd and right, like really reads the riot act. I thought, this is gonna be interesting to see the response. That was his exact response, so I kind of stole that a little bit. But he's like, wow, you seem really passionate about this, but here's the 3 key things that how I would respond to it, right? So it's being able to, in that moment, redirect it, identify the emotion, not necessarily like the specific emotion, but something like passion or some other word like
Yeah,
that.
flipping it, relabeling it to a positive, strong
Yeah,
emotion.
and trying to get them then to talk out, well, yeah, and actually, no, I'm a little bit mad about that, right? And then they can share it with you. You can't deal with it if it's not on the table, right?
Would you say, somebody's told me this, and instead of getting in the weeds with the person, to say, that's interesting, you say that, tell me more of your perspective.
Yeah, whenever it's like high emotion, you gotta almost step out of the content and address that.
This is something that I forward to as, especially with someone who has ADHD myself, and learning more about that. This emotion stuff is really helpful. I don't use it for other people, but for myself. But RSD, familiar rejection sensitivity dysmorphia, basically with that, it means that all of a sudden, it's like a surge of high emotion, and you cannot go away from it. You're hyper focused on it, and you have the inability to, like, you're just going to blah. And that's what happened for you when you had that text back. It's like, no, I've got to be heard, right? So recognizing that about myself has helped me to better regulate, so that I'm like, oh, Renee, you're in RSD right now. Go, I don't stonewall, but go take some cool off time, process it with the Lord, and see what's really important, and then go back to this and like, okay, where am I really? Because that first little bit, that RSD moment is like, boom, right?
More intense than it needs to be.
Yes, it is.
Right.
Noted, so
One more.
go easy around Renee.
I've never lashed out at anything.
Yeah.
Not the world.
So I grew up in a family where people didn't think before they spoke. And then tensions were high. And so for me, it's the whole flight and fight. I tend to stay on the fight side, which isn't good, but sometimes I do choose the flight and I avoid. So what I'm really trying to do is learn how to remove myself from a situation to allow myself the time.
Yeah.
So how do you do that when you're dealing with somebody because I've done that, and sometimes their reaction is, well, you just don't want to talk about it. I'm like, no, I do, but I know myself enough to know that if I continue this, and I'm really trying to learn this about myself, is to not say things that I don't want to. And so they're like, well, that just means you don't want to talk about this. So then they got upset. So what's how do you tell somebody you need to step back? It may not be somebody who
I would everything you said, I think is good. I think to minimize their defensive reaction to it is say, this relationship is so important to me that I want to deal with this in a positive manner, right? I want to make sure that we preserve the relationship and not let a single topic get in the way. All right, one more and then we got to move.
Yeah, I'll say this quickly, just because this situation came up so recently in my women's life group that I lead, and a particular person in the group in a sensitive situation, and a person that tends to jump really quickly to an extreme. Oh, well, I'll just quit, or I'll just this, or I'll just that, But I think the phone a friend, we're a community in Christ, and what that made all the difference. When I called a person outside of the group, a person at the church staff, actually, a director, and, like, can you pray for my group? This is going on right now, and I have this situation with this person. Of course, it's all in confidentiality. They were able to give me a couple good points of advice too, which, I had to kind of swallow my pride, like, oh, yeah, maybe I'll do what they say instead of how I feel I want to react. By the end of the day, the whole situation had turned around. And my interaction, my responses were better after having some coaching. And it makes all the difference, that phone a friend or a person that you can confide in, that will confide in you and help you coach you through it.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. Yeah. All right, so moving on to self-management then. So emotional self-control, what we just talked about, self-awareness is key. That's going to be your best friend in trying to manage those emotions. The other key takeaway there is manage the emotions, don't try to get rid of the emotion, right? If you're frustrated or upset about something, the idea isn't to get to zero, frustration or zero upsetness. The idea is to manage that emotion and not let it overtake the situation. So that's where you really want to make sure that we don't get in the mindset of we're going to get rid of all the emotion, because you won't, right? So you're never going to get rid of it completely. And then when you don't, then you're like, oh yeah, right, I can't manage it, right? So the idea is just to reduce it, like not let it rise from frustration to anger, to continue on with that example, but try to manage it. Adaptability is critical, being able to adapt and not view life as being threatening, but being able to adapt to different situations, different people. A lot of times that makes us more self-aware because we're, able to navigate the different situations. And then achievement orientation. This again goes back to that, wanting to do better. So most times if people are high achievement oriented, they are more self-aware, more likely to be able to deal with emotions and manage them because they're always striving to get better. And then they're most likely striving to learn as well. And then positive outlook. This isn't blind optimism. I think optimistic is getting a little bit of bad rap sometimes, where people put it in the category of blind optimism. Everything's okay, nothing's bad, right? That's not what it's about. It's real about being, again, it goes back to our earlier conversation where we have confidence in our ability with God, as we've added on, which I like, to get through that situation, even though it's bad. So yeah, it's bad right now. Okay, that's great. It's not going to be tomorrow, the next day, the next month, whatever it is, because I'm going to work through it. That's what true optimism is. And then we see opportunities more so than threats, right? So that's another thing that can help us manage our emotions. Yes.
I just wanted to say about optimism. I labeled myself as an eternal optimist.
Yes.
But what I actually was for a good part of my life was the eternal. Okay. So optimism without reality is the rose-colored glasses. It's fantasy. Like the house is burning down, but everything's fine. Everything's going to be great. Well, no, that's not really true. But optimism grounded with reality, which I'm so grateful that I married a realist. Two optimists, we'd be bankrupted down in a box by the river, everything's going to be great. Just driving ourselves insane. So the mix of how do we do this better? It is going to be better, kind of a faith combined with reality. Realism, I think, is super helpful. And that's what took the rose-colored glasses off of my life and put in more clear than rose-colored.
Nice. Great example. All right, so we get some help from Proverbs 16:32. Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city. This is just encouragement, right, for us to be a little bit more patient, look before we leap, so to speak, right? Think before we react, and those kind of things are all the encouragement that we get from Proverbs. And that helps us to manage our emotions then when we are able to. So, probably everybody in the room has had a parent at one time or another say, count to 10, right, before you respond. That's really true, right? Whether they knew it was based in biology or not, doesn't matter. It works because it's giving us at least 10 seconds, right, gap in between. And it also forces blood to the logical part of our brain outside of the small part of our brain that doesn't process information. So there really is truth to it, but that's why it's important to be patient. And then social awareness, empathy is probably the big takeaway here. Organizational awareness, I think in smaller businesses, probably not as applicable, because you probably don't have a big organization to politically navigate and those kind of things, but you still have an organizational structure, and you interact with others. Maybe they're not full-time employees, maybe it's vendors, customers. So you do have to think about how to navigate that. But empathy is probably the bigger one, even for anybody really. It really helps us to notice the other's reaction, right? That's where it starts from. If we're going to recognize what's going on for them, they're getting frustrated or whatever the emotion is, right? It's going to come because we're empathetic about them. Doesn't mean we necessarily agree with them. It helps to build connection. And then the last one is, it's not necessarily about agreeing with what they're thinking or how they're reacting to any given situation. And then organizational awareness is being politically astute. One of the things we have to be careful in our organizations, whether we're small or big, is that, again, we're not going to get rid of the politics, right? Because politics gets a bad name for a good reason. But if you think about the meaning of politics, it's really, kind of bringing different ideas together and negotiating with resources and all those kind of things, navigating that properly, right? Not in a self-serving way, but in a serving way. That's what we have to do. So even if we're a small business, we can think about navigating our businesses in that way. And then the guidance we get here, I really like, again, it's very simple. Romans 12:15, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. So notice it doesn't say rejoice with those who are rejoicing about the same things you're rejoicing about, right? It says rejoice with those who rejoice, and of course mourn as well. So it's about the other person, right? It's about meeting them where they are, being with them, and responding to their needs and what they're rejoicing about or mourning about.
That's not normal. Like,
It's not.
that's where we're different than people who don't have Christ.
I agree with that 100%, because we think, why do they react, especially in an emotional situation, right? Well, why are they upset about that? Like, I wouldn't be upset about that. Well, who cares? They are upset about that, right? So it's, right, you might want to help them through that. You might want to help give them different perspective, but you can still mourn with them, right? And help them through it by providing different perspective. All right, then relationship management. This is obviously the big one. I broke this down a little bit differently than the model on purpose, because I think as a small business owners, entrepreneurs, our organizations aren't quite as big, but so the three on the left side are probably more useful in that context. The two on the right side might be applicable and might be able to use them outside of your company with how you interact with customers and things like that. But the ones on the left are probably the bigger focus area. Influence, the ability to get buy-in, be persuasive, be engaging, right? If you're going to get someone excited about your product or service, right, you really need to do that, right? Be able to do that. And then conflict management, surface and deal with the conflict. Generally speaking, it would always be my advice, but not always, right? You do have to think about, does the relationship matter? Is it something I can resolve? Is it something I need to resolve? If we went about the world trying to resolve every conflict we face, we're going to spend a lot of time resolving conflict and not very much time living our lives, right? Someone cuts you off in traffic, you don't have to respond to that.
Oh, yes, you do.
You're wrong, Bryan. There's an emoji for that.
People that hang in the left lane. I want to have 2 guns.
Right.
Squirt guns, you need squirt guns.
If there's
You stay away from me on the road.
straight to the top. So we really have to kind of make sure that, if the relationship matters or the situation matters, then we're going to deal with it. Sometimes we're not, but most times it is. The guidance there is really about if the relationship does matter, not just trying to ignore it and thinking it's going to go away, right? You need to definitely deal with it. And really, when you think about conflict, why does it come about? Well, we have different opinions, We have different ideas, different feelings in business of what we want to do, how we want to do it. So sometimes conflict comes into play. So it's just a matter of managing it properly. Conflict can be a good thing. You know, studies show that if the companies that deal with conflict in a positive way are more creative, more innovative, right? So it's really an important part of it. It's how you deal with it. And then inspirational leadership, compelling vision, and articulated purpose, very important. A lot of folks at Noble can help you out with that quite a bit, but you're really trying to get people excited about that, right? So sometimes we think about this one as being more internal, right? Getting our employees excited and those things. But guess what? You have to get customers excited too, as well as maybe you meet somebody, they don't need or want your product or service. Maybe they know somebody who does. If they know somebody who does, you really want them recommending you, right? Not someone else. So being able to do that is very important. And then the last two over there, teamwork and collaboration. You know, if you have a team, certainly you got to do that and manage it effectively. If you don't, you can just think about your business ecosystem, right? You can still bring some of that in, right? Create cooperation, collaboration and those kind of things. You can even do that with customers, right? To kind of set the stage. And then coaching and mentoring, again, that's very important. That's one of the biggest values I find in Noble, right? Being able to do that for us and helping others is important. Even if you're a single solopreneur, right? You can still look for ways to give back. No matter what stage of your business you are in, probably there's somebody in an earlier stage, right? You can coach and mentor them, give them help and guidance, right? It's a way for you to serve, a way for you to connect with others and help others out. All right, anything on this one? All right. And so this one's a little bit longer, but Galatians 3:12-13, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If you have a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. This is good advice from generally speaking in a relationship standpoint, relationship management as the competency states. But it's also really, really good for that one that I talked about, conflict, right? So if you think about some of these behaviors, right, they're going to be your friend when you think about dealing with a conflict. They're going to help guide you. They're going to help you choose your words accurately. They're going to help you stay focused on not being right, not positioned, right? They're going to help you focus on resolving the conflict, no matter what it is. And of course, when we do have conflict, we do have to be ready to forgive. Yes?
I find that my emotions are stronger, that going back to that paper that has all of them, with the people that I feel safer with. Especially the one I'm married to. You know, that it's quick to go to something where others I'm more generous, giving them the benefit of the doubt, especially if I don't have as close of a relationship. I think this is extremely helpful for me to really start doing an even better job of voicing my emotions to help de-escalate the strength that comes. So I think the closer the relationship, sometimes the stronger the emotions, not less. And this was really helpful to identify that's a strength if I'll leverage it, because in that safe space, I know that we can patch up whatever difference of opinion and work through the emotions, as opposed to I tend to be more reserved with people that I don't really know that well. And I don't think that's a wrong thing. I think it shows a level of trust with the ones I'm closer to, but it also means that I don't want to be, unbearable with the one who loves me the most. So this is really helpful.
Thank you, and that's very true, right? We do tend to let our guard down, so we react maybe in ways we wouldn't want to. So it's a matter, I think sometimes it is okay because they are more likely to forgive you, but we don't want to take advantage of that and abuse it either. So I like your comments. Yes.
I do want to add that just because when we're in a larger group setting than one-on-one or something, that's not always a safe space, which is probably a whole different seminar. I just, we just have to put that plug in there that it is not always a safe space, and that's a whole different navigational process.
I would agree.
Okay.
Nobody's seething in this group, so I appreciate that.
Me too.
Don't tell me how I feel.
Let's go. Exactly. right?
It is a blessing when it's a safe space.
So this is just a reminder of the model. So one of the things I will touch on, and somebody already identified it way early on. There are different models out there that you'll find. And in some of those models, empathy is pulled out and put at the same level as these categories up here: self-awareness, self-management, and social awareness. Can anybody predict why that might be? Looking at you, because you talked about it.
Well, I was gonna say because it's your slide and you chose it.
That's part of it.
Oh, he gets an A plus. That's what's advanced.
There's another reason I would agree with it somewhat, but obviously not enough to put it on the slide.
If you can't empathize, then you're not gonna be able to have emotional intelligence. It's just, it's required.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't realize it was a professional strength until I read Now Discover Your Strengths by Marcus Buckingham, who had 30+ years with Gallup. And he identifies it as one of the 30+ professional strengths, empathy. I didn't realize that was. I knew I was naturally since I was a child, but I didn't know it was a professional strength until I realized, so as an empath, you can be the most effective kind of engaging leader because you're slipping in other people's shoes effortlessly. But I didn't realize they were beginning to or had elevated it to a place where I have a workshop on empathy, teaching people who aren't naturally empathetic how to be empathetic. Because it's something you can learn to do, even if it feels against the grain, to where it's not how you feel as you're projecting it, it's how the person feels and responds to you projecting it.
Yes.
Whether it feels natural or put on.
Yep, and so I think that's why it's brought out, because it really is such a critical and key factor to having good relationships. I keep it here because I think this helps. I like to always know why I'm doing something, right? And so by having it here, then it's more clear that why I'm doing it is for social awareness. Right? I'm trying to figure out what's going on with the other person or group of people, and it really starts with empathy. So that's why I stay with this, but understand why they sometimes pull that out. All right, so how can I build EI? So this is where we'll, how much time do you need to wrap up? 5 minutes? Okay, good, we're in good shape there. So the, in your book, work pamphlet is probably more accurate. We do have a section here where you can start to build, so we'll just spend a little bit of time starting to build our goal, and we will, you can finish it then on your own. So you're gonna review your assessment, so go to the scoring page. The most likely culprits are gonna be one of your 3 lower scoring elements, right? You're gonna choose one to improve, and then we're gonna create a plan. And then you're also gonna be thinking about, are there strengths that you can leverage to accomplish that as well? So I do wanna, has anybody heard of SMART goals? Okay, so a lot of head nods. So I won't spend too much time on this, then that's good. But really, if anybody hasn't heard of it, it's really about being specific. So it should be written down, it doesn't have to be 5 paragraphs, but it should be written in a way that somebody that wasn't involved in you or someone helping you create it would kind of know what you're gonna try to do. So think about that level of specificity. And then measurable, some things are more measurable than others, but always you can find a measure. I've done a lot of work with goals, no one stumped me yet. It's not because I'm smart, it's just because everything can be measured. And then attainable is something you actually do, right? If you put a goal down there that costs $50,000, you don't have $50,000, well, guess what? It's probably not gonna happen unless you find $50,000, right? And then relevant isn't important. So you'll see some other SMART models where that says realistic. Well, didn't we already just accomplish that? And attainable is my response to whoever created that one. So I always pick this one with relevant. So is it important? Is it actually something that's gonna make an impact on your life? And then timely, when are you gonna do it? Right? Not someday, you gotta be, like I always like to say, you gotta be able to point to the calendar, right? You can't just say, I'm gonna do it, or you gotta be able to point to a calendar and do that. So that's the initial part of setting up your goal. In that front part is making it specific. So that top part where it's laid out there is really like a more brainstorming, get ideas down. Don't take too long, right? Don't try to get it perfect the first time out, but just get through it, right? And get it down there. And then, of course, you're going to refine that at the bottom of that first page, middle of that first page. You know, here's the final wordsmith goal that you'll come up with as you get through that. And then the other things to think about, this is where the journaling comes in. And this is part of the development plan that I've shared with you. So there are learning events, training. You took some today. Hopefully it was helpful. You can use that. There's lots and lots of other training that you can do. Books. I put at the front here 3 of my favorites. So those are, you can look at them, you know, after we wrap up here and everything. But those are 3 of my favorites. Of course, my professor, Richard Boratzis, he applies it to leadership. So I really kind of like that one. And then Daniel Goleman, who Richard works quite closely with, he's kind of the originator of saying, hey, we should focus on this in our organizations and things like that. And then this, Travis Bradbury, this is a newer one, and it has a simpler assessment than the other ones, but yet it's more complex than mine. And that one is really geared, that one has more tools and things to apply it. So that's kind of why I like the work that they've added in there. Of course, conferences you can go to. So this is all just learning events. Figure out who can help. Maybe you get a coach, a mentor, some expert might help guide you. There's lots of videos on YouTube and things. Getting feedback from others. And if appropriate, sometimes we can match up with an observation partner, right? So if you're trying to develop a goal, I always recommend this, and someone sees you when you have opportunities to use it or not use it, right? Share that goal with them, get them to give you feedback over time, say, yeah, you did pretty good there, or ooh, that wasn't quite the way the way your goal was stated on that. And then applying it, I included journaling in that because I do think it's a very important aspect of it. You're going to apply it on your job and your business with your customers, all those entrepreneurial relationships we talked about. And then you're going to, you know, you can do role plays, things like that, work with things, you know, personal situations where you have the opportunity to use some of this stuff, especially emotional intelligence. And then journaling is a very good tool, right? You can even just reflect after some of your interactions and try to decipher, okay, now that I had time, a little bit of distance between it, you know, what would have I done differently, right? And if you have a specific goal, what would I do to help me reach that goal? So that brings us to the end. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, have this thing you can scan. And then any questions before we wrap up and finish?
So Bryan, I'm gonna be the challenging one.
Good.
So friends said you're an asshole. But so this is where I really struggle on goals, like, because what we talked about is so important, that it's very subjective. It's vague, it depends on the situation. So like if your goal was to be well, I guess one goal would be more effective listening, you could probably measure that. But if it's you know, dealing with a high volatile situation like Chaz explained or whatever. So like how would you turn it into a goal, I guess? Okay.
So I would try to figure out what is getting in my way from doing that. Like, and then, you know, I don't know what it is for you, but, you know, maybe it's you're not being empathetic enough. I'll just make that up. I'm not saying you're not empathetic, but it's a likely culprit. So you're not being empathetic enough. So you would want to build a goal around being more empathetic.
Okay.
Right?
Or more effective listener.
Yeah, listening might be part of that, right? So then you could get it back to measuring it. We'll always come up with a goal. If anybody like goes through this exercise in earnest and comes up with a goal and you get to a point and you say, I don't know how to measure that, connect with me on LinkedIn. I almost guarantee you
I'm just gonna say,
that we'll find a way. Yep. Yes.
So what I would say is if one thing of advice, I was kind of working through this in my head because everything can be measurable, right? Everything can be smart. Was like the questions ask yourself, are these situations, how often are these happening? It's like, is you're a magnet for high stress conversations? It's because of your environment, loved ones, workplace. Some of the workplaces I worked in, that was going to happen regularly and not because of me. So kind of your environment, kind of look at that first. But then kind of internalize, okay, so this high stakes, high energy, high emotional conversation is happening once a month. hard to measure that, and it's random. It's not every month it's going to be this. So it's more like self-work. And how can you measure that in yourself in a way that has something you can track, so that you're better prepared when that does happen if it's random. Now, on the other hand, if it's happening regularly, sometimes that's the inner work of like, am I causing this, or is it because of the environment that I'm in? And if it's the environment you're in, you're not going to be able to change that, but you know you're going to need to be more prepared more often than not because it's likely to happen. So I think it's a combination of self-examination, looking really at your environments, because those can facilitate, can spark these high emotion conversations, and not because of you.
That's a wrap. I'll stay around for a while. Questions, yeah.
Let's give Bryan a hand. You know, one of my roles now in Noble is to kind of help get speakers to these events, and I'm super excited about the lineup that's coming and just a year ahead of us when it comes to bringing people like Bryan in, not just to the lives, but to the online forums as well. We had a great session this last Thursday about how to wow your customers and engage them up front so that they fall in love with your brand right away, so that they don't think about going anywhere else. You're the one they're gonna go to. And so we have a lot of great topics lined up already. We have a lot of great topics coming up in the future. And on that topic, if you have anything that maybe Noble hasn't talked about yet, a topic that like, man, this would really help me in my development, in my business, or as a leader, or as a person, come talk to me. We're actually in the process of trying to line up speakers. So if you have that topic that's like, I wish Noble would address this topic, and you think it's a topic that would help the whole, then let me know what that topic is so we can kind of keep that in mind. And speaking of topics, we have two great ones coming up. We have on the 27th, another online forum. Sharon Gill is going to be talking to us. How many of you deal with imposter syndrome? A lot do, right? And so she's going to come talk to us about how do we deal with that? How do we deal with imposter syndrome? Because I know for me, sometimes, a lot of times I struggle with that. Who am I to be doing this? Who's going to listen to me? All this stuff that gets in the way. So she's going to come and talk to us about that. And then on February 17th, we have Dr. Sylvia Jones coming, and she's going to talk about how to pursue your entrepreneurial vision. So I'm really excited to hear Dr. Sylvia speak on that. And actually going to be an interview style. And that's something else we're trying to do more of this year is to hear stories of entrepreneurship, stories of success, stories of struggle. And so Chaz is going to be leading that interview on that day. So I hope you come to those. Couple of things really quick. We do have a YouTube channel where we put this content on there. So if you have not followed us on YouTube, go ahead and give us a like. And if you missed any of these or you want to re-listen to them, you can find those on YouTube. We also do one-on-ones, like Chaz was talking about earlier. So if you're interested in doing a one-on-one, talk to Susie. There's a sign up over there at the table, so make sure you get signed up to do that. Last thing, we also send out a motivational email that goes out 3 times a week. That comes out from me on behalf of Noble. I try to keep them really short, really encouraging, getting a lot of good feedback from those emails. If you have not signed up to do that, you can do so on the back. That concludes today's Noble event. Thank you again so much.
You're welcome. One last thing. Promise my mom will do this. Hi, Mom.
She didn't know you to say hi back. We do want everybody to go up front and get a picture. Yep.
And thank you guys for joining us online. Come on up and we'll get a photo.
We're gonna leave the the Zoom call on for a little bit so that if you want to talk to anybody in the room, you could potentially do that too. But I am going to stop the recording. Thanks for joining us today.
You gonna be back, I'm sure.
Yes.
On the